I'm Emily, 35, and I never expected my biggest professional moment to turn into a quiet war inside my own living room. I had just come home from work when I told my mom about the promotion. I didn't make a big announcement. I said it casually, the way you do when you're afraid of jinxing something good. Her reaction wasn't excitement. It was laughter, soft and certain. She didn't even look up from her phone at first. Just that short, dismissive laugh followed by, "That's not how promotions happen." The words landed calmly, but they struck something deep. I stood there holding my bag, realizing I was smiling out of reflex, not happiness. I tried to explain, but she waved it off gently, like she was correcting a child's misunderstanding instead of listening to the truth unfolding in front of her. What she didn't know was that I'd already signed the new contract digitally that morning. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not friends, not co-workers, not even my best friend from college. I wanted the news to live quietly inside me for a few hours before becoming public. I wanted to test how it felt to carry something good without immediately defending it. Her disbelief shattered that experiment before it even began. I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop still in my bag. My inbox still showed the confirmation email near the top. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew it was real. But somehow, hearing my mother invalidate it made reality feel thinner than it should have. I stayed there longer than necessary, wondering when doubt had learned to sound so familiar. During dinner, she brought it up again, this time with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So?" she said lightly. "Are you sure that wasn't just an internal title change?" The way she phrased it made it sound reasonable, caring even. I felt my grip tighten around my fork. I explained the meeting, the responsibilities, the salary adjustment. She hummed politely. No argument, just disbelief wrapped in concern. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone in the hallway. She wasn't yelling. She never yells when she doubts me. She keeps her voice low and controlled, like she's protecting me from my own imagination. "She thinks she got promoted," she said quietly. "I think she misunderstood something at work." That sentence echoed in my chest long after she hung up, reshaping everything I thought I'd just accomplished. The next day at work, my manager stopped by my desk and congratulated me again in front of 2 co-workers. They smiled, asked questions, welcomed me to the new role. I thanked them with my professional composure intact, but inside, something felt fractured. At home, I was imaginary. Here, I was real. The contrast lived in my chest all afternoon, making every success feel oddly unfinished. That evening, my aunt texted me congratulations. I hadn't told her. I hadn't told anyone. When I asked how she knew, she replied, "Your mom mentioned something, but she sounds worried." I stared at the screen, realizing my promotion was already traveling through my family, but not as truth, as concern, as confusion, as something questionable. My own news had become a distorted version before I even had a chance to own it. I wanted to confront her immediately. I imagined dozens of sharp responses, but I didn't use any of them. Instead, I went home quiet, emotionally careful. I watched her cook dinner and talk about grocery prices and weather patterns as if none of this existed between us. The normalcy felt almost theatrical. I kept wondering how someone could doubt your reality so calmly and still call it love. I slept poorly that night. Not from anger, but from nervous looping thoughts. I kept replaying my manager's words, her phone conversation, my aunt's text. Each one carried a different version of truth. I realized something unsettling. My promotion didn't just challenge my career path. It challenged the role my mother had assigned me years ago. And that kind of challenge doesn't go unanswered easily. The next morning, she knocked on my door holding a folded sweater. "I washed this," she said. "You left it in the dryer." Then, too casually, she added, "You shouldn't get your hopes too high about this job situation." The timing was precise, surgical. I nodded without responding. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was certainty. That same certainty that had followed me through every attempt at self-definition. At work, HR emailed me asking to confirm my availability for onboarding paperwork later that week. I stared at the message longer than necessary. That single email held more validation than weeks of conversations at home. I understood quietly that evidence wouldn't be the problem. Acceptance would. And some people don't struggle with truth. They struggle with losing control over the stories they've been telling. That afternoon, my mom rearranged the living room without asking. She does that when she's anxious. Moving furniture, reorganizing shelves, creating order when uncertainty creeps in. She kept talking about backup plans and being realistic. None of it was directly about me, but all of it was aimed at the same idea: that I shouldn't settle into confidence too comfortably. I listened without interrupting, absorbing what her movements were really expressing. The tension didn't explode. It settled. That felt worse somehow, like a low-pressure system waiting to shift. We spoke normally about other things: food, bills, a neighbor's dog, but every silence carried weight. Every pause felt like unspoken disagreement. I understood then that disbelief doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just reorganizes the air around you until breathing feels slightly off. My phone buzzed near midnight with a reminder from HR about documentation. I read it in the dark. The light from the screen felt too bright against the quiet of the room. I thought about how absurd it was that strangers trusted my professionalism more easily than the woman who raised me. That idea didn't make me angry right away. It made me sad in a way I hadn't prepared for. I started wondering how many times she had filtered my achievements through fear before sharing them with others. How many milestones had been softened, reframed, questioned. I didn't think she meant harm, but impact doesn't wait for intention. It settles anyway. And that night, the impact sat heavy across my chest as I tried to fall asleep beside the echo of her doubts. By the third day, I noticed I was avoiding conversation entirely. Not out of anger, out of preservation. Every word felt like it needed armor. When she asked about my schedule, I kept replies vague. When she asked about my workload, I generalized. It felt strange hiding good news, but it felt stranger defending it. I began to realize how often I'd been performing confidence instead of actually being allowed to feel it. On the fourth evening, she invited a cousin over for dinner without telling me. Halfway through the meal, the conversation drifted, inevitably, toward work. My cousin turned to me with a curious smile and said, "So, I heard you're getting promoted?" My mother laughed gently before I could answer. "That's what she thinks," she said lightly. My chest tightened as every pair of eyes turned toward me. I felt exposed without having spoken a word. In that moment, I understood that disbelief isn't passive. It's public. It doesn't just live in the space between two people. It travels. It reshapes how others see you before you even open your mouth. I forced a polite smile and said nothing. The silence spoke for me, but it didn't protect me from the quiet humiliation curling under my ribs. That night, after everyone left, my mom acted as if nothing significant had happened. She rinsed dishes. She wiped the counter. She asked if I wanted tea. I nodded automatically, still wrapped in the feeling of being dismissed in my own home. I realized then that something inside me had shifted. Not into anger, into resolve. A quiet, unfamiliar determination I hadn't felt before. I went to my room and opened my laptop. For the first time since the email arrived, I opened the official promotion letter and read every line slowly. My name, my new title, my responsibilities, my salary. It was all there, clear, unambiguous. I closed the laptop afterward and sat in the dark, understanding something important had begun, not at work but inside me. Because whether she believed me or not, my life was already changing. And soon, that change wouldn't fit quietly inside doubt anymore. The following morning, I left the house earlier than usual, carrying a quiet tension I couldn't name yet. At a stoplight near downtown, my phone vibrated with a message from HR confirming the onboarding appointment. The time and address were formal, precise. I reread it twice, feeling a steady mix of pride and disbelief. Then another message arrived seconds later, this one from an unknown internal number, asking if I had a moment to discuss something confidential. At first, I assumed it was routine, but the word confidential settled differently in my chest. When I arrived at the office, my manager was waiting near the elevators with a tight, unreadable smile. She led me into a small conference room I had never used before. The glass walls made me suddenly aware of how exposed private conversations can feel when they happen inside public spaces. She thanked me for my consistency over the years, her tone professional but unusually measured. Then she added something I had not expected. The promotion had originated from a recommendation outside my department. My name had been submitted by someone in executive leadership, someone who had quietly followed my work without ever introducing themselves. That information landed harder than the promotion itself. I realized my effort had reached further than I ever imagined. When I asked who it was, she hesitated just long enough to make the pause feel intentional. "It's best it stays anonymous for now," she said gently. The room felt suddenly warmer. I wasn't used to being noticed without knowing exactly where judgment was coming from. Walking back to my desk afterward, I carried that mystery with me. Not fear, but curiosity layered with a new kind of responsibility. At lunch, I sat alone in my car instead of joining coworkers. I tried to process the idea that someone with power had been watching me succeed quietly. The thought unsettled me in an unexpected way. I wasn't intimidated by the person, but by the version of myself that had existed without validation, unaware of how far her work had traveled. That version of me felt smaller now, but also strangely stronger. When I returned home that evening, my mom was on the phone with my aunt again. I caught only fragments as I passed through the hallway. She stopped speaking when she saw me and ended the call quickly. Her eyes followed me with a hint of nervous calculation. It was the first time I sensed hesitation in her certainty. Something invisible had shifted between us, and she seemed to feel it too. During dinner, she asked about HR paperwork with forced casualness. I answered briefly, choosing neutral facts over emotional detail. She nodded, poking at her food, then cleared her throat. "Your aunt thinks maybe your company just changed titles," she said. "Sometimes they do that without money attached." I didn't argue. I simply said, "They didn't." The confidence in my voice surprised even me. Later that night, I received a private email from the executive assistant to the COO requesting a short introduction meeting later in the week. My hands trembled slightly as I read it. This wasn't just a promotion. It felt like placement within a new layer of the company I had never touched before. I thought about how invisible I had felt for so long, and how suddenly visible I was becoming without asking for it. I didn't tell my mom about the email right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to experience certainty without defending it first. That felt new. Instead, I went to my room and sat quietly, feeling the shift inside me settle. I realized how much energy I had spent anticipating doubt rather than trusting progression. That awareness alone felt like its own deep change. The next day at work, subtle differences appeared. People greeted me with more attentiveness. Conversations paused when I approached. Not out of suspicion, but recognition. It felt uncomfortable at first, like wearing a jacket that didn't quite fit yet. I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror and barely recognized the steadiness in my posture. Something inside me had started aligning with the external change. That evening, my mom rearranged the living room again. She does that when control slips. I watched her move furniture just inches at a time, never satisfied. When she noticed me observing, she stopped. "I just want things to feel settled," she said. I nodded softly. "So do I." The words carried different meanings for each of us, but the overlap was real. On Thursday morning, I woke to a text from my manager reminding me about the executive meeting. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. A part of me wondered whether my success would continue to destabilize the version of me my mother seemed invested in preserving. Growth didn't just change the person growing, it disrupted the environment that had grown around them. Before leaving for work, my mom asked what time I'd be home. Not suspiciously, carefully. I told her it might be late due to meetings. She nodded without commentary. That silence felt intentional. As I closed the front door behind me, I realized this was the first time in a long while that my schedule belonged entirely to me. The executive meeting was brief and almost understated. The COO introduced himself without formality, thanked me for my contribution to several key projects, and said leadership had noticed how often my initiatives stabilized struggling operations. He spoke with calm authority, not flattery. When I left the room, my knees felt weak, not from fear, but from the weight of suddenly being seen so clearly. That afternoon, a formal salary adjustment document was uploaded to my portal. The numbers startled me, not because they were extravagant, but because they represented proof that effort could compound into momentum I hadn't been taught to expect. Sitting there alone at my desk, I felt something loosen inside my chest. The story that had followed me for years, the one about being overly idealistic, was finally dissolving under quiet evidence. At home, my mom was unusually restrained. She offered food, asked simple questions, avoided commentary. I sensed she was waiting for something. I decided not to fill the silence with reassurance or explanation. For the first time, I allowed uncertainty to exist on both sides instead of only mine. That night, my aunt texted again. Her message was short. "Your mom sounds confused today." I stared at the words for a long time. I realized confusion was new for my mother. She had always lived in certainty about me, about life, about control. And now, that certainty had cracks she couldn't ignore. Before bed, I checked my calendar for the following week. Orientation meetings, new project assignments, all real, all documented. No ambiguity remained anywhere but at home. That contrast became impossible to ignore. Success had moved beyond belief. It was operating independently of approval now, and that frightened and freed me at the same time. As I lay in the dark, I thought about the anonymous acknowledgement that started this shift. Someone had believed in my work without needing to reshape it, without filtering it through fear or protection. That realization lingered deeply. It didn't make me feel superior. It made me feel accurate, for the first time in a long while. By morning, I knew something irreversible had begun. Not a fight, not a breakthrough. A quiet divergence between who I had been allowed to be at home and who the world had already accepted. And I sensed the moment was approaching when those two versions of me would finally meet in the same room. And when they did, the truth would no longer be something anyone could soften. The weekend arrived with a strange heaviness, like the air before a quiet storm. I tried to treat Saturday like any other day. Laundry, errands, grocery lists. But my mind kept circling the same thought. My life had changed, and my own mother still refused to step into that reality with me. Every small task felt like stalling, delaying a conversation I knew couldn't be postponed forever without costing me something important. By mid-morning, my aunt stopped by unannounced with a casserole and a head full of questions. She kissed my cheek, complimented my hair, and then asked, far too casually, "So what's really going on with this promotion?" Her tone suggested she expected clarification, not confirmation. I glanced at my mom, who busied herself with plates, avoiding my eyes. The silence between them told me they had already exchanged opinions about my credibility. I decided to answer clearly. I told my aunt the exact title, the department, the salary bracket, the timeline. Every detail was verifiable. She listened, eyebrows raised, then said, "Wow, that's a lot." She glanced at my mom, as if checking whether it was safe to believe me. Mom gave the smallest shrug, the kind that says, "You see what I mean?" without using words. That gesture stung more than anything spoken aloud. Something inside me clicked into place. I realized evidence wouldn't matter if someone was invested in holding on to an older story about who you are. Doubt had become a shared language in my family, and I was tired of translating myself through it. Instead of defending every detail, I asked my aunt if she wanted to see the HR emails. My voice was calm, but my hands trembled slightly under the table. Her reaction surprised me. She hesitated, then said, "If you want to show me, sure," sounding more gentle than skeptical. My mom, on the other hand, stiffened beside the sink. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quickly, as if proof itself were threatening. The irony struck me. She'd spent days telling people I was wrong, yet now that I offered clarity, she suddenly wanted to pretend the question didn't exist. After my aunt left, the house felt smaller. Mom moved around the kitchen with sharp, economical motions, the way she does when she's trying not to explode. Finally, she spoke. "You made me look foolish," she said quietly. "At first, I didn't understand. By talking about your promotion like it's settled when it could still fall through," she added, folding a dish towel with unnecessary precision. It was like listening to someone argue with a future only they feared. I took a breath and told her the truth. The paperwork was signed, the salary updated, the role already active. Nothing was hypothetical anymore. She stared at me, searching my face for some hint of doubt to cling to. When she didn't find it, she looked away. "You always think things are permanent," she muttered. "Jobs vanish. People change their minds." Her words revealed more about her history than my present. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my budget spreadsheet, adding the new salary line. Watching the numbers shift made everything concrete in a way conversations hadn't. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine practical changes, paying down debt faster, building savings, maybe moving out sooner than planned. The idea of leaving this house stirred both relief and guilt, two emotions that rarely arrive separately in my life. I thought about independence not as escape, but as breathing without monitoring someone else's reaction. My phone buzzed with a message from a coworker, a casual, "Congrats again, you deserve it," accompanied by a celebratory emoji. I stared at it longer than necessary, realizing how easy belief looked when it wasn't filtered through childhood history. Belief from strangers shouldn't feel more natural than belief from family. But there I was, feeling exactly that. On Sunday, Mom suggested we host a small dinner the following week to celebrate your news properly. The phrasing caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't know whether she was planning a genuine celebration or a quiet stage to reframe the story. I asked who she wanted to invite. "Just your aunt, your cousin, maybe our neighbor Diane," she said. The inclusion of the neighbor felt oddly specific, and I couldn't quite place why. Diane lived next door and worked in administration at a local company. Not mine, but close enough in industry to understand corporate structures. Mom respected her opinion in ways she rarely respected mine. Suddenly, I understood. Mom wanted a witness she trusted to interpret my promotion, to validate whether it was real enough to believe. The realization hurt, but it also clarified what this dinner was going to be about. I agreed to the dinner anyway, partly out of curiosity and partly out of exhaustion. I was tired of letting other people tell my story in rooms where I wasn't fully present. If my promotion was going to be discussed, I wanted to be there, anchored in my own voice. I decided I wouldn't perform defensiveness or over-explain. I would simply state facts and let them land where they needed to. During the week, work became a refuge. The new role demanded more of me, but in ways that felt aligned rather than draining. Colleagues asked for my input on decisions that used to bypass me entirely. My days were fuller, sharper. Then, near the end of one shift, HR sent a follow-up email confirming that they would be calling me at home to finalize some compliance details. I almost replied immediately to change the number. Instead, I left it. The thought of HR calling the house made my stomach flip, but it also stirred something fierce and quiet. I had spent weeks shrinking inside my own walls, trying to avoid conflict. Maybe it was time to stop editing my reality to make disbelief comfortable. I closed my laptop, heart racing a little faster than usual, and told myself I wouldn't interfere with whatever timing unfolded. The night of the dinner approached faster than I expected. Mom cleaned obsessively, scrubbing surfaces that were already spotless. She kept asking small, loaded questions. Would my company keep me if budgets tightened? Had I signed anything binding? Her concern dressed itself as practicality, But underneath it, I heard the same worry, that my success might collapse and take her certainty with it. For once, I didn't try to soothe that fear. When guests arrived, the house filled with overlapping voices and familiar casseroles. I moved through the rooms, offering drinks, answering polite questions, feeling both present and distant in my own home. Diane arrived last, carrying a store-bought pie and an easy confidence that seemed to relax my mother instantly. They chatted in the kitchen for several minutes before I joined them, sensing the unspoken agenda settling into place like cutlery on the table. At dinner, conversation circled closer and closer to my job. My cousin asked what my new title meant in practical terms. I explained simply: teams I'd oversee, systems I'd manage, goals leadership expected. Diane nodded thoughtfully, occasionally jumping in to clarify something in more technical language. Mom watched her closely, measuring every reaction. It was as if my words only became real once filtered through someone my mother deemed authoritative. At one point, Diane looked directly at me and said, "That's a significant role, Emily. They don't hand those out lightly." The room quieted slightly around the clink of silverware. I didn't look at my mom, but I felt her processing that statement like a new piece of data she hadn't accounted for. My chest tightened, not from anxiety this time, but from a tentative sense of validation landing somewhere beyond my control. Dessert was just being served when my phone started buzzing on the sideboard, screen lighting up with the company's main number. For a second, no one moved. My mom frowned at the interruption, already reaching to lower the volume on the music. "You can let it ring," she said, almost relieved to have something practical to control. My heartbeat answered before I did, recognizing exactly who was calling and why it mattered. I stood up slowly, feeling every gaze shift toward me as I crossed the room. "I need to take this," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. As my hand hovered over the phone, I realized I wasn't afraid of what HR might say. Their version of my promotion already matched reality. The only tension in the room belonged to everyone else, and I was finally done carrying it for them. HR's number flashed on the screen, and for once I didn't feel like hiding good news. I picked up the phone while everyone watched, their conversations softening into a hush. "Hi, this is Emily," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. The HR representative sounded cheerful, professional, and entirely unconcerned with the tension in my dining room. She asked if it was a good time to quickly confirm details about my new position. I walked a few steps toward the hallway, but not far enough to leave the room completely. I was tired of my life existing in separate compartments. "Yes, now is fine," I answered. I put the call on speaker, resting the phone on a small side table. My mom frowned, confused. Diane tilted her head with interest. The HR rep began reviewing my official title, department placement, and start date like reading from a script. She mentioned the phrase, "lead operations specialist," clearly and confidently. My heart thudded once, heavy but steady. The rep then confirmed the salary figure, the performance bonus eligibility, and the fact that the promotion had been approved by senior leadership weeks earlier. Every word floated into the room like carefully folded paper, landing on surfaces that had held doubt only minutes ago. No one said anything, but I could feel the air recalibrating. When the rep paused, she asked if I had any questions about the transition. I glanced at my mom, who looked as if someone had quietly taken away the script she'd been using. I asked one or two practical things about benefits and onboarding. Nothing dramatic. The conversation was brief, simple. It sounded exactly like what it was, routine confirmation. But inside this house, it felt like a quiet earthquake rearranging long-set assumptions. Before hanging up, the HR rep added something that surprised me. "We're really glad you accepted, Emily. Your department's feedback about you was incredible, and leadership is excited to see what you'll do in the new role." Her voice carried easy sincerity, not flattery. I felt my cheeks warm. I thanked her and ended the call. The room fell into a silence that seemed to stretch further than the walls themselves. For a moment, no one moved. My cousin stared at his plate. Diane studied my mom carefully. My mother's face had gone noticeably pale, as though every word from the phone had drained color from it. She clutched her napkin tightly, eyes fixed on the now dark screen. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt oddly calm, like I'd been standing in strong wind and it finally stopped, leaving everything exposed exactly as it was. "So," Diane said gently, breaking the silence. That sounded extremely official. There was no sarcasm in her tone, only quiet affirmation. My cousin nodded slowly, clearly processing what he'd just heard. I didn't rush to fill the space. For once, I didn't feel the urge to defend, explain, or soften anything. I simply sat back down, letting reality rest between us without commentary. The difference in my posture felt like its own small revolution. My mom finally spoke, her voice thinner than usual. They really called you about that," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. It wasn't a question. It was an adjustment. She looked up at me with eyes that seemed suddenly older, stripped of certainty. "I thought maybe you misunderstood," she added, trailing off. Her sentence never finished, but the meaning was clear. She'd built her doubt on assumptions never checked. I took a breath and chose my words carefully. "I know you thought you were protecting me," I said quietly, "but I needed you to believe me, not save me from something that wasn't falling apart." My voice stayed steady, even as my hands rested tightly together in my lap. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was trying, finally, to lay our reality flat on the table beside the untouched dessert. Diane shifted in her chair and spoke softly. "I've worked in HR for years," she said. "They don't call like that unless everything is very real and very intentional." She glanced at my mom, kindness in her expression instead of judgment. "You've got a capable daughter, Linda. That's a good thing, even if it's scary." Hearing someone my mom respected speak those words felt like a bridge being gently extended between two distant sides. My mom's shoulders slumped slightly, as if a weight she'd been carrying privately had become too heavy to disguise. "I'm not used to things working out this way," she admitted. "Your father promised a lot and disappeared. Jobs ended. Plans fell through. I guess I thought if I kept your expectations low, nothing could hurt you as much." Her honesty landed heavily, reshaping the image of her I'd been quietly resenting for years. I listened, letting her explanation exist without immediately erasing the impact. "I get why you're afraid of disappointment," I said, "but when you assume I'm wrong before checking, it doesn't protect me. It just makes me feel small." The room stayed quiet. My cousin stared at his hands. Diane looked down at her napkin. This wasn't a conversation meant for an audience, yet having witnesses somehow kept both of us more honest. My mom exhaled slowly, then did something I didn't expect. She said, "I was wrong." The words were simple, but they felt enormous coming from her. "I shouldn't have told people you were confused. I shouldn't have doubted you out loud like that." She didn't look at me when she spoke. She looked at the table, as if the surface could absorb her admission. Still, the words reached me in a way apologies rarely had before. I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. Relief that she'd finally acknowledged what hurt. Grief for all the earlier versions of me who never got that sentence, who learned to swallow doubt as quietly as breathing. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. I didn't dress it up. I didn't rush to say it was okay. It wasn't, not entirely. But it mattered that she'd stopped pretending nothing needed to be addressed. Diane gently redirected the conversation, asking me about the kind of projects I'd handle in the new role. I described a few initiatives, keeping my tone measured. Gradually, the room's energy shifted from tension to cautious normalcy. Dessert plates filled. People resumed eating. My mom remained quiet, but her silence felt different now, more reflective than defensive. She was processing, not avoiding, and that distinction mattered more than any perfectly worded apology. After everyone left, the house felt unusually still. I began clearing dishes, moving slowly, giving my mom room to decide whether she wanted to speak. She hovered near the counter, opening and closing a cabinet without actually taking anything out. Finally, she turned toward me. "I told Diane you were exaggerating," she admitted softly. "I told your aunt too. I thought I was being realistic. I didn't realize I was cutting you down. I set a plate gently in the sink and turned to face her fully. I know you've been through a lot, I said. But I need you to understand something. When you repeated that I was wrong, people believed you more than me. I started doubting myself too. I can't keep living like that, especially now that my life is actually moving forward. Saying it made my chest feel both lighter and achingly exposed. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening but not spilling over. I don't know how to stop worrying, she said, but I don't want to be the person pulling you backward anymore. It wasn't a promise exactly. It was a beginning. I appreciated that she didn't try to make grand declarations she couldn't keep. Her honesty about her own limits felt like a more trustworthy foundation than sudden sweeping change ever could. Before bed, I opened my laptop and printed the promotion letter, something I hadn't bothered to do before. I placed it in a simple frame I found in the hall closet and set it on my dresser, not as proof for visitors, but as a quiet reminder to myself. The document didn't just represent a new job. It represented a moment when I chose to stand in my own reality, even when it was inconvenient for others. As I turned off the light, I realized the real shift wasn't that my mom had finally believed HR. It was that I no longer needed her belief to validate what I knew. Her acceptance would make the road smoother, but its absence would no longer reroute my path. That understanding felt like the true promotion. One inside my own life, earned through years of stumbling, learning, and finally refusing to shrink around someone else's fear. The morning after the dinner felt unusually quiet, like the house itself was catching its breath after holding tension for too long. I brewed coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the street wake up. For the first time in days, I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. The weight that had pressed against my chest all week felt lighter, not gone, but shifted into something I could actually carry without bracing. Mom joined me a few minutes later, moving more slowly than usual. She didn't reach for her phone right away, which I noticed instantly. Instead, she poured coffee and stood beside me at the window. We watched a neighbor load groceries into a car without saying a word. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt tentative, but honest, like two people trying to figure out a new arrangement without forcing it too quickly. After breakfast, she surprised me by asking if I'd show her the details of my new role. Not the salary this time, not the headline, what the work actually involved. I brought my laptop to the table and opened a dashboard I'd been learning to use. She leaned in, curious in a way that felt unfamiliar but genuine. For the first time, she wasn't measuring my success against fear. She was trying to understand it. As I explained the systems I'd oversee, she asked thoughtful questions, not loaded ones, real ones. It struck me how different her face looked when she wasn't guarding herself with doubt. Softer, less sharp around the edges. When I finished, she nodded slowly and said, "That sounds important." The word landed differently than praise. It felt grounded, acknowledging responsibility instead of just outcome. Later that afternoon, HR emailed again with final onboarding documents. Buried in the attachments was something I hadn't expected at all, a relocation assistance option. It wasn't mandatory, just an offer for employees stepping into leadership roles who might need to move closer to headquarters in the coming months. My chest tightened slightly as I read it. The promotion wasn't only changing my title, it was quietly opening doors I hadn't even imagined yet. I didn't mention the relocation option right away. I needed time to understand what it meant to me before deciding how it might affect anyone else. The thought of moving out of my childhood home suddenly felt less like a distant idea and more like a practical future crossroads. That realization didn't flood me with excitement or dread, just a steady awareness that my life was stretching into new territory again. That evening, Mom asked if I wanted to take a walk around the block with her. She used to ask that when I was younger, back when walking together felt automatic instead of strained. We walked slowly, the quiet hum of early evening surrounding us. She didn't lecture or probe. She just walked. Halfway through the loop, she said quietly, "I really thought keeping you close was the same as keeping you safe," I answered honestly. "Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. She nodded as if she'd expected that. The rest of the walk passed in thoughtful silence. I sensed she was wrestling with the idea that safety doesn't always look like proximity, that letting go doesn't mean abandonment. Those aren't easy ideas for someone who learned to survive by gripping tightly to what she loves. Over the next few days, our house settled into a new rhythm. She still worried. I still guarded certain conversations. But the air between us felt cleaner, as if something stale had finally been cleared out. She stopped questioning my schedule and started asking how my day felt instead. That shift might have looked small from the outside, but inside our relationship, it felt like a significant recalibration. At work, things moved quickly. New responsibilities stacked up. People came to me with problems instead of past me. The learning curve was steep, but I felt steady inside it. One afternoon, my manager mentioned casually that leadership was already impressed by how smoothly the transition was going. I didn't feel flashy pride when I heard that. I felt certainty settling deeper into my bones. Toward the end of the week, my mom found the framed promotion letter on my dresser. I watched her read it slowly, taking in every line this time. She didn't comment right away. Later, while washing dishes, she said, "You know, I never framed anything of yours before." Her voice carried quiet regret. I dried my hands and said gently, "We can always start now." The words felt like an invitation rather than a reprimand. That night, I finally told her about the relocation assistance option. I expected panic. Instead, she went very still. "So you might move," she said carefully. I nodded. "In a few months. Maybe." She didn't argue. She didn't warn me. She just sat with the idea longer than I expected. "If that happens," she said slowly, "I want it to be because you truly want it, not because you feel you have to escape." Her response surprised me more than the offer itself. I told her the truth, that for the first time, I wasn't feeling like I was running away from home. I was feeling like I was running toward a life I'd earned. That distinction felt important to say out loud. She listened without interruption, which told me more than any reassurance ever could. The following weekend, my aunt called to apologize for doubting me. Her tone was awkward but sincere. "Your mom told me I shouldn't have questioned you," she said. She said she did enough of that herself. I closed my eyes, absorbing that sentence. It wasn't just that my mother had changed how she spoke to me. She was changing the story she told about me when I wasn't there. That shift echoed outward in subtle ways. Family conversations became less concerned, less suspicious. My success was no longer framed as fragile or temporary. It felt like something solid people could lean on without fear of it collapsing instantly. I realized how powerful it is when the person who once doubted you the loudest becomes the one quietly correcting others. On my first official paycheck in the new role, I sat alone in my car for a moment after work and looked at the deposit confirmation. Not because I needed to check the math, but because the number represented years of persistence that once felt invisible. I didn't feel rich. I felt validated in the most practical sense. Survival had started turning into stability. That night, Mom and I ate takeout on the couch, something we hadn't done in years. No tension, no undercurrents. Just soft background noise from the TV and the shared comfort of quiet companionship. At one point, she said, "I used to think your sensitivity would make you weak." She hesitated. "Now I think it might be what made you strong enough to keep going." The honesty in that moment felt like a gift. As the weeks passed, the idea of relocation became more real. I visited the headquarters once with my team and stood in a space that might someday be mine. I didn't commit immediately. I wanted my decision to come from desire, not momentum. The difference mattered. Every new opportunity no longer felt like an accident waiting to disappear. It felt like a consequence of steady, unglamorous effort finally being recognized. One evening, I found my mom in the garage, sorting through old boxes. She held up a dusty photo of me from my first internship. "You were terrified that summer," she said. "I wish I had told you then that being scared didn't mean you weren't capable." I swallowed hard and told her, "You're telling me now." We shared a quiet smile that carried years of unspoken repair. Standing in my room later, I realized how much had changed without a sudden, dramatic rupture. There had been no shouting match, no grand reconciliation. Just truth spoken under ordinary lighting. Just reality entering a room it had been kept out of for too long. And somehow, that quiet unfolding felt more permanent than any explosive confrontation ever could. Now, when I think about my promotion, I don't feel the need to defend it. I don't feel the need to prove it. It simply exists, solid and real, alongside a relationship that is still imperfect, but finally honest. The approval that once felt necessary has been replaced by something steadier. Self-trust. And as I look toward the next chapter, whether it leads me across town or across the state, I know one thing clearly now. My life no longer needs disbelief to define its shape. It only needs my willingness to keep choosing forward, one grounded, unshrinking step at a time.